David, can I ask you to introduce yourself to share a bit about your experience?
Sure. Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks, Diana, for having me here and presenting. And it's great to meet all of you and understanding where you're all coming from. Um, I am currently a brand strategy consultant. I have my own practice, Brand Unison, but I've worked for very large advertising agencies, management consulting firms. I worked as a CMO for some tech startups. So I've had a lot of experience both on the consulting side and the client side. Um, all four of my grandparents were born in Lithuania, Klaipėda, Kaunas, and Vilnius. I have not yet been to Lithuania, but I will be going in April. So if you see me wandering around, say hello. Um, and if you want to learn more about my consulting practice or me, feel free to go to my website, and I'll show you my email address and my website at the end of this presentation. So let's jump right in. And it's first of all, it's great to have so many folks. Sometimes I kind of have sessions where I ask people to share their thoughts. I don't think we're going to be able to do that today just because of the large number of people, but I will give you a couple exercises that you could do on your own, and then hopefully those will be helpful. So let's just jump right in. First of all, everyone has a different definition of what a brand is. I like to call a brand a promise. And it's a promise of how you're going to interact with your customers, how you meet your customers' needs, and the voice you speak with. And I'm going to be talking a lot about needs because I have kind of a contrarian view of branding. A lot of folks say, think about what you do that nobody else does and just promote that. My view is think about a need that your customers have that no one else knows about and make that a key part of your brand. And speak with that voice. So that's my philosophy. And I work a lot with companies, but sometimes I work with people on their own personal brand. I've worked with tourism organizations to brand places. But whether it's a product, a place, or a person, differentiation is crucial. And always ask yourself, why am I different from others? But being different isn't about just pushing your product, because everyone wants to talk about all the little bells and whistles that their service has or their product has. But it's the brands that recognize their audience's needs and really organizes their brand about some of those hidden needs that really can differentiate you. And feel free to jump in if you do have any questions. I can't see you right now, but I'll hear you if you have a question. So what truly differentiates a brand? And I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, maybe too much time, but I see a lot of brands trying to be different by just being wacky, just being, using humor in a way that gets attention, but doesn't really say much about their brand. Some brands say differentiate themselves just by saying they're different, or they say we're the only ones who, fill in the blank. Well, my belief is that truly differentiated brands dig deep into their customers' needs, and they find hidden needs that their competitors haven't noticed and responded to. So if you can spend a lot of time thinking about how can I understand, and at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how you find those needs, but if you think about, and you may already know your customers well enough to say, what are some of the needs they have that I have a feeling I'm the best at delivering against, and my competitors don't really understand them or don't really know them. And one of the tools that I use in building out a brand is it's just called a brand platform. And it's a very simple philosophy. The brand platform is based on your unique discovery of your customers' hidden needs. That's always at the top. And then the bricks of that platform are the personality that you have to support your brand, your messages, your brand positioning, but it all starts with customer needs. You're going to be tired of hearing me say the word needs in the next 45 minutes, but it's just so important in building your brand. So what's the goal of the brand platform? First, it's just to articulate what those needs are and recognizing that some of them are going to be needs that you have a unique insight into. And then you build the attributes of your brand that's going to differentiate yourself in meeting those needs. And this brand platform is ultimately going to be the litmus test for everything you do. If you decide to do a LinkedIn post, is that consistent with the brand that you've built? If you decide to do something at a trade show, is that consistent with the brand that you built? It's funny, I've worked with some really, really large brands, and one of the first things I do is I interview people in the C-suite. So I'll talk to the CFO and the CMO and the CEO, and I'll just ask a simple question. What does your brand stand for? And I'll get 4 or 5 almost completely different answers. And that's when I say, gee, maybe we need a brand platform that everyone can embrace and everyone can use as their playbook so that everyone's speaking with the same voice. And you can guarantee if the folks at the C-suite can't articulate what the brand is or are saying different things about the brand, you can pretty much guarantee the people at the front line are also saying completely different things to their customers. So there are 4 elements of the brand platform. First, of course, target audience needs. And these are both the tangible and the intangible needs of your audience. And I'll talk about the difference there between tangible and intangible. And then there's the brand positioning. And that's just a statement, a one sentence that describes how your brand uniquely meets these needs. And then personality attributes. You know, we all have, as individuals, we all have personalities. Brands have personalities. And in a little bit, I'm just going to talk about, don't forget your own personal personality when you're thinking about what your brand's personality is. And it sounds like a lot of you are starting companies from scratch. And it's a unique opportunity to say, what is there about me that I could put into my brand, you know, that makes it unique and makes it recognize what my customers' needs are. And then finally, there's supporting messages and themes, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a bit. So let's talk about the target audience needs. 2 kinds, tangible, and a lot of brands talk almost exclusively about their audience's tangible needs. You know, what kind of features do they need? What kind of price, you know, do we have to deliver? What's the performance that we have to deliver? What are all the bells and whistles that we have that we can build our brand around? But a lot of brands don't recognize the intangible needs. So they may have customers where trust is the most important buying criterion that they have. You know, yeah, the product has to work, yeah, it has to be priced correctly, but if we don't trust you, we're going to go to your competitor. And we may even pay more in price because of that trust. Some customers, the most important thing to them is to feel valued. You know, does my client or does my vendor really value me, not just as a customer, but as a person? Do they empathize with what some of the problems that I have? And, you know, what's some of the struggles that I'm having as a business? Do they really value me as a person and what I'm going through and what my company's going through? And then some customers like to feel really involved. They want to get in there and roll up their sleeves and work side by side with you in figuring out what's the best solution. And it's really important to recognize those customers because you have to approach them in a different way. You have to really involve them in finding out the solution. Good news is a lot of your competitors ignore these intangible needs. So if you recognize these needs, that's really the key to differentiation. So I'm not going to give you 2 minutes to do this, but I'd like for you on your own to just think about one intangible need that your customers have that you can highlight in your brand positioning. And if you have something that you can jot down right now, you know, what's that first thing that comes to your mind that's an intangible need? It has nothing to do with your product features or your service elements. It's just an intangible need that you suspect that your customers have. that you can deliver. And by the way, I'll make this presentation available to anyone who wants it. You'll have my email address at the end of this, and you could either email me or email Diana. She has it as well. And because I may be going pretty quickly, so if you want to take a look at this presentation again, just let me or Diana know. So the second element of the brand platform is the brand positioning. And there are four things that a brand positioning has to do. First of all, people have to believe it. And you've seen a lot of brands make claims that you think, I really don't know if they can pull that off. And once you cast that doubt, then you have problems connecting with your customers. It has to be relevant. You know, I've seen a lot of brands say something about themselves that I say, oh, that's really interesting, but I don't care about that. So it has to be relevant to what their needs are. Ideally, it's unique. No one else can claim that they meet that need the way you can. And then it has to be durable. It has to be something that you can continue to deliver, not only where you are now, but as you grow as a company, as you start hiring more employees, as you start going into more and more geographies. Can you continue that brand positioning as you grow and as your competitors start to grow? So the brand platform is basically one sentence. It's a long sentence, but it has four different components. First, just identify who your target market is. And you may have more than one target market. So it's important to just articulate who is my target market, not just what industry are they in or what size are they, but how do they define what it is that they do? And then an expression of what business you're in. And I'll talk about how you can differentiate yourself by thinking differently about how you describe the business that you're in. And that in itself can be a differentiation. And then how do we meet the key audience's needs differently? That's the point of difference. How do we meet those needs in ways that our competitors can't? And what are those needs? So this is a question that I ask a lot of clients, and I say, what business are you really in? And they kind of look at me funny because they think, well, of course, I'm in the communications business, or I'm in the industrial supply business. But sometimes thinking about what need are we really fulfilling, and defining your business that way. And I always use the example of Disney. And I've worked with Disney in the past, and you can ask any employee at Disney what business they're in, and they'll all say, we're in the happiness business. We're not in the theme park business. We're not in the movie business. We're not in the licensing business. We're in the happiness business. So just think about that, the way Disney describes the business they're in when you're thinking about your own business. And it just might give you some new insights about what you need to do in your brand to really make that come alive. And your customers will understand that. I understand happiness, and I understand how Disney delivers happiness. And that's important for me to know, because as Disney starts to expand its businesses, as long as they continue to be in the happiness business, I'm going to continue thinking about them. So just take a couple minutes on your own. Just think about that, and just say, I thought I was in the blank business, but you know what? I'm really in the X business. And it's a tough one. It's a tough thing to do, but when you do have that rare moment of Zen where you can think about this, it really is helpful.
And David, I would like kind of to stop. Maybe somebody, maybe we can take like a minute, and like if somebody have an idea and want to share, because this is like a really great one. Just kind of to think, like I thought I was in this business, but I'm really is. Or if maybe somebody has already have, some example or want to share something, because usually we don't take time to think about all these things, but I think it's just a really good exercise. Maybe like, if anybody wants to share. some ideas? Or actually, David, do you have any examples too, or something from
Yeah,
your customers that you did exercise with?
sure. I worked for I worked with a small bank, and it's so difficult for banks to compete with the big guys, with the Bank of Americas and Wells Fargo and KeyBank and all
Hmm.
these big banks in the US. And I talked to their customers, and it kind of dawned on me that a lot of them were small businesses where the whole family worked in the business. And you're all probably familiar with these folks. You know, one partner does, the accounting, and the other partner does the marketing, and one of the children, is the delivery person. Um, and I started throwing around the notion of what they really do isn't banking. It's they help small business families be small business families. So in this case, they weren't in the banking business, but they're really in the small business family business. And in fact, we trademarked the tagline, "The Bank for Small Business Families." And so we owned that. And then another bank came along and said, we want to buy you. And as it turned out, what they paid the most for was that tagline, because they wanted to own that tagline. So it's one of the only times where I think a tagline actually you could attach a dollar value to what a tagline was. So anyway, that's a long story, but I welcome any of you to share your own thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maida, I think you have hand
Thank
up.
you. If no one else has a specific example, it's more of a question, David. As I think about this and I think about some of the businesses that I know are online today, do you find then typically the first line is about kind of the technical side of the business and very, niche focused, and then in reality you end up being in people business in general, right? Because at the end of the day, it's serving people needs and that in any shape or form across industries and types of businesses. Is that true or
Yeah,
not? Thanks.
yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for that. When you're first starting out, there are what I call table stakes. Your product has to work. It has to be priced competitively. It has to have ideally a track record in some trials or some beta tests. Um, but after a little while, customers are going to say, "Yeah, you're okay. Congratulations. Now you're like everyone else, but tell me more." And I worked at one of the tech startups that I worked at was and this was at the beginning of when people could get legal information online, and they could even do a will online, or they could do a trust online. They could get legal advice online. And we thought we were great. Hey, this is great. Everyone can get their legal advice online now. They don't have to go to a high-priced lawyer. Well, probably about 5 months after we started, there were 4 other competitors doing exactly what we were doing. And so then we had to dig deep and say, what's the barrier that we have to go through to reach these people? And it was trust. People had some very serious life-changing issues they were dealing with. And now they're dealing with them online to a person that they're not sitting in front of. Um, so I guess in answer to your question, make sure you have the table stakes right, but then also think about, okay, what's the barrier? What's the real barrier that's going to get me through the door with these folks?
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, David, for taking this extra um,
Yeah, and feel free,
time. Yeah.
Diana, to slow me down at any point. Yeah, I'm happy to do
And
that.
also, like I want everybody to raise their hands if they have a question. So I think let's make this interactive, and we don't have to cover a lot of information, but just kind of answer your questions and, share your ideas or your concerns or suggestions. Yeah, thank you.
And actually, since you invited me to, Diana, I'll share just a couple other quick stories about actual clients that I work with. Um, there's a company called Wizards of the Coast, and their biggest product is called Magic: The Gathering. It's a role-playing card game, and when when I first started working with Richard Garfield, who created the company, um, he said, David, we have no problem getting kids, and when I say kids, teenagers, and even 20-something people, we have no problem getting them to play our game, and in fact, they're fanatic about it. But our problem is parents are very skeptical of what it is that their kids are doing because the illustrations were pretty, I guess, gothic. Parents had misconceptions about what role-playing games actually are. They think their children are joining a cult and all that stuff. So we quickly realized we had to address the needs of the parents to truly understand what it is that this game is about and what their kids are doing. So it's just an example of figuring out who's the gatekeeper in this case, and a lot of times, it was the parents. And then another client I worked with was the WWE, World Wrestling, and my job was to do research following their pay-per-view events like Survivor Series, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and understand for the people who paid $30 to watch this event on pay-per-view, what did they think? And this was at the very beginning when pay-per-view was starting. And I realized that they wanted to see the storylines continue from one event to the next. Whereas before they were kind of standalone. They wanted to see a continuous storyline among the wrestlers in the categories. And so I would meet directly with Vince McMahon, and he's a totally different persona in person than he is on TV. And he's very thoughtful. And he really listened to that and said, one of the few times I heard Vince McMahon just say, "This is great. I love it." But no, seriously, he really took into account the fact that, yeah, we got to create stories. And they did. And they started building out stories, and they built out a brand for each of their wrestlers. So again, it's just understanding that the need at the time for their fans was, I want more. I want more stories. I don't want to just see an event and then wait 3 months for the next event. And that also, and it gets me a little, it's kind of a nice segue to personality attributes. And if you think about what the needs are first, before you say, okay, I'm going to be this, I'm going to develop this personality, and I'm going to see who wants that. If you think about the need first, and then think about what kind of personality do I need to deliver that as a brand, if the need is for that customer I talked about that wants to be part of the solution, then collaborative should be an image attribute I want to convey, and I want that as part of my brand platform. And then you've all seen customers who they want to experiment, and they're very cautious, and they just don't want to jump right into things. Consider having patience and hand-holding as one of your personality attributes. And when a customer sees that you're willing to do that, they see that you really understand them. And then there are some customers that use partnerships to advance their business. So if you position your brand as, hey, we're connectors, we can help you develop those partnerships. We can work with your partners. We can facilitate those partnerships as part of our solution. That's another example of recognizing the need and then making yourself appear like you do recognize it and it's part of your brand. And then the last element of the brand platform, I call supporting messages. And for a long time, I was trying to think of how do I describe that? And I think the best way to think about it is to say, if one of your personality elements is patience, you're patient. I always say, well, tell me a little bit about what you mean by patient, because patient could be a lot of things. Patient could be, okay, take all the time you need and get back to us when you're ready. that's patient. But patient could also mean being empathetic, being flexible, even being comforting, being, I know this is a tough decision. If there's any way that we can help you think about this, that's a different kind of patient than take all the time you need. If you position yourself as collaborative, what does that mean? Hopefully, it means you're easy to work with. You want to share your strengths with them, and you want them to share their strengths with you. And you also want to position your team to be accessible, because clients or customers who really want to work closely with you need to know that your team is accessible to them. So whatever personality elements you use as part of your brand, always take that next dive and say, well, okay, that's a good word, but what do I really mean by that? And why is that important to my customers? Okay, so here's an actual brand platform. I worked with a consortium called Maine Built Boats, and they were about 30 boat builders here in Maine. And I traveled up and down the coast, talking to all these boat builders and talking to some of their customers. And some of these builders built, 12-foot dinghies, and some built very, very expensive yachts. And so my job was to figure out, okay, what do they all have in common? What do their customers all have in common? And this is what we came up with. Their audience wanted to feel special. They wanted to be involved. They wanted to buy quality and value. And then we started thinking about, okay, what's our personality as Maine Built Boats that's going to address that? And words like authenticity and pride, ingenuity, and being understated. One of the things that the boat builders told me almost to a person is, we don't like to brag. We don't like to just go out and just beat our chests and saying we're the best. They're a little more understated than that. And integrity was very important to both the customers as well as the boat builders themselves. And as an example of digging down to that next level, if you take a word like pride, say, what do we mean by pride? Well, to have passion, to feel it in the soul, to feel in the soul that this is the boat that I want, and these are the people that I want to work with, to get that boat. And then to have a sense of reward. And in most cases, it was an emotional reward. So you're not going to build this brand platform in a day. It's going to take a while, a lot of thinking to do this. But I guarantee once you build this brand platform, it's just going to guide so many things that you do. And so, I really urge you to just start building this little by little. And I just want to show you what came out of this project. So this is on their website right now. And, if you look at the language that they use, our boats are built on a maritime heritage other places only read about, a sense of pride, integrity. And they literally took my words, literally, and craftsmanship that runs from Kittery to Eastport. A Maine-built boat doesn't just come from the state of Maine, it comes from a state of mind that's all but disappeared. And then this is just one more marketing thing element that they used on their website. Does she speak to you, meaning the boat? Don't look at the spec sheet, just answer from your heart. Is this the boat you dream about? Is the craftsmanship flawless? Are the lines authentic and true? Does it embody centuries of maritime tradition? Would you be proud to stand on her deck? Or put it another way, is she a Maine-built boat? So once you have that brand platform, these kinds of messages should come easier to you. And almost, I don't want to say write itself, because we don't want to talk about AI, but you should be able to go from your brand platform to something like this and really resonate with your customers. So let me back up for a second. Are there any questions about some of these elements, or does this look doable to everyone. I mean, and what do you think the most challenging part about putting something like this together would be for you?
Hi, David. It's quite challenging, I think, when I look from a company perspective where we have 20 people. Would you have an advice how to organize this brand platform? Building this brand platform, should it be management? Should we involve like all employees of 20? Can you give a tip how to work better on this?
Sure. Yeah, I think the worst thing would be to just take this template and say, okay, fill it in for me, and then I'll collect all of them at the end of the week and see what we got. I think the best thing is to just start one section at a time. So, to have your team together and say, let's just talk about our target audience's needs. Let's just talk about our customers' needs. You don't even have to show them this platform. It's just let's talk about needs, and introduce that notion of tangible needs and intangible needs, and especially the people who work directly with customers. I mean, they're going to know this. Sometimes, unfortunately, the CEO isn't the person who's dealing directly with customers. So it's really important to get them involved as well. And then, either in the same meeting or maybe in a different meeting, say, okay, what is our personality? What is the personality of our brand? And you'll start to hear words, and then you'll start to hear some consistency in some of the words that are being used. And then you say, okay, now we know what our target audience's needs are. We know about personality we're going to use to deliver that. Now let's take a shot at writing that positioning statement. And then another exercise, and it could be a different meeting, say, okay, we talked about this personality element. We talked about ingenuity. What do you guys think about what that means? How would your customers describe ingenuity? And in the case of Maine built boats, ingenuity wasn't some really high-tech solution. It was just something that's practical, something that's responsive, and something that is very entrepreneurial. Maine people, I think in general, and I'm understanding this more about Lithuanians as well, tend to approach things with a kind of an open mind and saying, let's just step back and think about how we could do this differently. Because Maine is a small state, Lithuania's a small country. We're facing very large competitors. We have to use a little ingenuity to do things differently.
Thank you, very helpful.
And
okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Vaida, you have a question too, yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it. I just wanted to build on Gražina's question actually, and because that's what I was thinking as well, is the cost versus delivering some of these things, and I think is especially important to companies, Lithuanian companies coming into the US, kind of how to balance the cost and the price of delivering these things, like the hand holding, the partnership, all of that at scale. And I'm sure in your experience you must have seen companies, especially maybe if we take a tech company example, or anything else, right, that have done this successfully at scale. I think the kind of the price and the quality element, and what has worked well, really. Please, thanks.
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm thinking back to my management consulting days, and we would always have clients who questioned the cost of what we do. But when you dig down as to what they consider costs to be, how did they look at costs, and what way do they think of it? And we figured out it wasn't just the fees. It was, how are we going to save them money by doing this? How are we going to make them more efficient? And how does that translate into lower costs for them? And in a lot of instances, we weren't the lowest price, In most instances, we were the highest price. But we were able to help clients see that we can directly impact their costs. And I know it's tough as a startup or even a early stage or even mid stage technology company to say, we're not the lowest price, but we can help you. But really digging down into what are the other value adds that we can deliver to them that will not only justify our price, but go to their bottom line. I don't know if that was a direct answer to your question, but I know that struggle that you have in terms of being able to deliver things that your customers can't deliver, but also being price competitive. It's really getting at what are your customers dealing with in their financial situation, and how are you going to directly impact that with what you deliver.
Thank you. Value-based selling, that's what you're referring to probably.
I'm going to keep moving. I only have a few more slides to go, and I want to make sure that we have some time for questions as well. So one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning was, you all have a personal brand. You may not have created a brand platform for yourself. You may not even have written down what all your personality elements are, but you pretty much know what they are and how people would describe you. And then your business has a brand. And so I always encourage folks to say, when you start a business, try to see if there are parts of you, your own personality elements, that you can transfer to your business. And then when you start a business, if one of the personality elements for your business brand is ingenuity, how can you make sure that whenever you have meetings with a customer or client, you make that part of your personal brand as well? And one of the examples I always use, and you've all probably come across this, is there could be this big retail brand that has just a perfect branding, and you really understand what their personality is, you really understand how they position themselves. And then you go into the store, and one of the cashiers or one of the service people on the floor are almost the opposite of what that brand is. And that just destroys your whole connection with that brand. And if you have a team and your team is facing a customer and they don't understand what kind of image attributes you're trying to convey, that's a problem. And one of the things that I did with the bank that I talked to you about is, we took the brand platform and we made sure that every teller, everyone who had frontline interaction with the customer had that brand platform on their wall and really understood what it was that the bank was trying to convey. So this is an example of how that works. So let's say one of your customers' needs is to feel involved. So your business brand is all about being collaborative, having a co-developed culture. You team build with the customer. Your personal brand can be about being easy to work with. You check your ego at the door, and you're a people person. And these things then work together. So the customer thinks, okay, they're kind of walking the walk, and they're talking the talk. That the brand that I see being promoted is consistent with the person I see in front of me and who that person is. So that's really important. So again, this is a drill, an exercise you can do on your own. What's the one personality trait you have that should be a greater part of your company's brand? And it's kind of a fun exercise because I'm sure people describe you as something that you may not have considered being part of your company's brand. And it's really helpful. Okay, actually the second to final slide. How do you discover these hidden customer needs? And the answer I always give is talk to them. Ask them, why did you choose us? What do we do that our competitors don't do? Why are we a good fit for your company's culture? And what's the one need you have right now to help you grow? And I was working with a small consulting firm one time, and I tried to persuade the CEO to always ask a new client, why did you choose us? And how did you hear about us? And he wouldn't do that. And I said, well, why aren't you doing that? And he said, well, it makes us feel insecure. I'm like, no, actually, it makes you feel like you can really understand the customer. So never be afraid to talk to your customers and just ask them outright, why did you pick us? And then also study their brand. Go to their website, go to their social media, go to their LinkedIn posts and say, what are the needs what are their customers' needs and how are they addressing those needs and how do they position their brand and what's their brand personality? And the more you understand what they're trying to accomplish, the more you can say, all right, I'm going to help them do that. I'm going to be consistent with what they're saying to their customers. And there are things like focus groups, there are things like surveys, and most small companies don't need to do that. They can just talk directly to their customers, and they can certainly study their customers' brands as well. And then just some final thoughts. So branding is an everyday activity. I mentioned, meet with your team and, try to develop this brand platform. But the brand platform is a living thing. You are continually learning about your customers. And you say, you know what? Originally, we had these 3 customer needs, but I think we just discovered one that's even more important than one of these. And we need to make sure we integrate that. And that every personality trait that you have could be a key element of your company's brand. I've already emphasized that, but I really do think that's important. And then the 3 hallmarks of differentiated brand that, if I had to boil it down to 3 things, what's it about? Understanding your customers' needs, aligning your brand to those needs, and then creating messages that show how you meet those needs. I don't want to say it's as simple as that because it's hard, but sometimes you can get distracted about what branding is all about. But it really is about those 3 things.